experienced professionals at the Census Bureau that we have in place an A plan to conduct the census, accompanied by an A team to execute it. We are now entering what I call the A-level, high-performance execution phase. Regarding the President's executive order, we are carefully reviewing it. First steps include implementation, and we began that upon issuance, such as planning an interagency working group. We will update the Secretary and this committee on our progress. The message of the 2020 census is clear. It is easy, safe, and important. It is easy because of improvements in new technologies. People may complete the census anytime, anywhere. We have internet, phone, and paper self-response options. Our language assistance can reach 99.6% of the population. We will have trained enumerators to follow up with those who are late in responding. This will be the first census ever where we expect most people to submit their data electronically and efficiently. The census is safe. Census data remains secure and confidentiality protected. Stringent laws with criminal penalties of imprisonment and fines apply. Employees take a lifetime oath to protect confidentiality. The Census Bureau sets the highest standard and maintains a culture and practice of protecting confidential data. It will not be shared with any agency or anyone. The census is more important than ever. As the ranking member just described, census data is needed for apportionment and redistricting. It is used for federal, state, and local governments to develop policies and allocate billions of dollars for programs and services reaching millions, including the $29 billion that you mentioned in your state, ranking member. It is used daily by people in making decisions that affect business, communities, and quality of life. Some recent innovations include new technologies for enhancing address canvassing, new options to reach hard-to-count populations, more phone centers to provide customer assistance, a doubling of partnership specialists to work with communities, and new technologies to support census-taking processes. These and other innovations and time-tested operations have increased our confidence that we will deliver a complete and accurate count on time and on budget. Our priority is to reach hard-to-count communities. I continue to visit hard-to-count communities across the country. They exist in all states. I have seen local partners reaching people in those communities in better ways. Counting children has been a perennial challenge. We are making improvements by working with others, ranging from pediatricians to the public schools. We have dedicated efforts to reach American Indian and Alaska Native communities, including the Navajo Nation, which is roughly the size of West Virginia. We have plans to reach the homeless and others. Everyone must be counted. Partnership specialists from local communities with different backgrounds help this process. We also have an integrated, research-based outreach campaign with messages that resonate with diverse communities. Cybersecurity is paramount. We have a well-designed and tested cybersecurity program. Data is encrypted at every stage. We work closely with the Department of Homeland Security, the intelligence community, and industry experts to identify and respond to threats. We manage risk, assist with oversight, and test systems for security, functionality, and scalability. External oversight and accountability and support are valued. First, the Bureau is committed to assisting this committee and others in Congress in addressing matters of interest or concern. Oversight is deeply appreciated. Second, we appreciate the work of the Government Accountability Office and the Department's Inspector General in our preparations. I discussed the 2020 census being on the GAO high-risk list with the Comptroller General. The designation is appropriate in light of the scope, complexity, and importance of the census. We are committed to GAO's key components of a healthy program. We also meet regularly with the Office of Inspector General to discuss issues, concerns, and to receive advice. Third, we appreciate the financial support we receive on a bipartisan basis from Congress. Funding certainty is needed throughout the 2020 census. We appreciate support in all forms from all sources. Recently, the IG expressed her interest in working with us to promote the safety of personnel. Commerce components have expressed a desire to help as well, as have other federal agencies, including the Department of Health and Human Services and the Peace Corps. We thank members of Congress and others who are assisting with our hiring recruitment and who serve as trusted voices. The 2020 census is clear. It is easy, safe, and important. As we enter our high-intensity sprint, hiring goals are being met. We are on budget. Our systems are safe and secure. We are following best business practices and have the right people in the right positions doing the right things. I am confident that we are more ready than ever. Canvassing begins next month. The time is now. The duty is ours. And while much work remains to be done, we remain on track to achieve a complete and accurate count. Thank you for your support, and I look forward to your questions.
Thank you, Director Dillingham. Our next two witnesses are from the U.S. Government Accountability Office, and they'll be sharing testimony. So you have Mr. Robert Goldenkopf. Mr. Goldenkopf is Director of Strategic Issues for the U.S. Government Accountability Office. In his role, he oversees a portfolio of work aimed at improving the federal statistical system. Our second witness from GAO is Mr. Nicholas Marinos. Mr. Marinos serves as Director of Information Technology and Cybersecurity with GAO. And Mr. Marinos manages audit teams that perform government-wide cybersecurity, privacy, and data protection reviews across all the major federal agencies. I believe we're starting with Mr. Goldenkopf.
That's correct. Chairman Johnson, GAO is pleased to be here today to discuss the Census Bureau's readiness for the 2020 headcount. As you know, in recent years, we have identified a number of operational, IT, cybersecurity, and other challenges that raise serious concerns about the Bureau's ability to conduct a cost-effective enumeration. In February 2017, we added the 2020 census to GAO's list of high-risk government programs, and it remains on our high-risk list today. My remarks this afternoon will focus on two such challenges: implementing design innovations aimed at controlling costs, and developing reliable cost estimates that better account for risks and inform annual budget estimates. My colleague, Nick Marinos, will then discuss the challenges the Bureau faces in implementing and securing critical IT systems. The bottom line is that as the countdown to Census Day grows short, the Bureau has made important progress towards mitigating some of the risks facing the census, and we are encouraged by the Commerce Department and Census Bureau's leadership commitment toward carrying out a cost-effective enumeration. Still, the Bureau estimates that the census may cost as much as $15.6 billion, a $3 billion increase over the Bureau's original estimate, and significant uncertainties lie ahead. For example, with respect to design innovations, to help control costs while maintaining accuracy, the Bureau will use new procedures and technology for 2020, including greater use of automated data collection methods, administrative records in place of data collected by enumerators, verifying most addresses using aerial imagery and other in-office procedures rather than by going door-to-door, as was done in past enumerations, and allowing households the option of responding to the census via the Internet. These innovations show promise for controlling costs, but they also introduce new risks, in part because they have not been used extensively, if at all, in prior enumerations. As a result, testing is essential to ensure that key IT systems and operations will function as planned. However, citing budgetary uncertainties, the Bureau scaled back operational tests in 2017 and 2018. Without significant testing across a range of geographic locations, housing types, living arrangements, and demographic groups, operational problems can go undiscovered and the opportunity to refine procedures and systems could be lost. Another risk factor is the reliability of the Bureau's 2020 lifecycle cost estimate. In August 2018, we found that although the Bureau had taken steps to improve its cost estimation process compared to prior versions, it still needed to implement a system to track and report variances between actual and estimated cost elements. The Bureau released an updated version of the cost estimate last night. We plan to review it for any changes, as well as the extent to which the Bureau implemented our open recommendations. In short, while the Bureau and Department of Commerce have taken important steps to keep preparations for the decennial on track, additional steps are needed. For example, as of June 2019, we've made 106 recommendations related to the 2020 census. Commerce has generally agreed with these recommendations and has generally taken actions to address many of them. The Bureau has implemented 74 of the recommendations, and 31 remain open. Going forward, to help ensure a cost-effective headcount in the months ahead, continued leadership attention and strong congressional oversight will be needed to help ensure that the Bureau continues to implement our recommendations, that key components and systems work as required, that the operations stay on schedule, and management functions follow leading practices. This concludes my prepared remarks. I will now turn it over to my colleague, Nick Marinos, who will discuss the risks facing the Bureau's IT and cyber efforts.
Mr. Marinos.
Thank you. Chairman Johnson, Ranking Member Peters, members of the committee, thank you for inviting GAO to discuss the Bureau's efforts to prepare for the 2020 census. As Robert mentioned, our most recent high-risk report highlighted a number of IT-related challenges facing the Bureau. These included IT systems readiness and cybersecurity. The bottom line is that these challenges still remain today, and we believe it's important for the Bureau to overcome them prior to the 2020 census. Starting with systems readiness. The Bureau plans to rely heavily on IT for the 2020 census, including through the use of 52 systems it plans to produce over the course of multiple stages of census operations. Many of these systems will be deployed multiple times in order to add needed functionality over the course of 16 operational deliveries. The Bureau has delivered the first group of systems to support early hiring and training, and the next few months will see key testing and production deadlines for many additional systems. However, our ongoing work has determined that the Bureau is at risk of not meeting key IT milestones for 5 upcoming operational deliveries. These include deliveries in support of Internet self-response, a new innovation that the Bureau intends to rely on for a significant portion of responses to the census, and recruiting and hiring for peak operations, which includes hiring hundreds of thousands of temporary employees to assist with counting the population. The Bureau needs to closely monitor these schedule risks in order to ensure that they are all delivered on time. Regarding cybersecurity, the Bureau is working hard to assess security controls, take needed corrective actions, and gain the proper sign-off to ensure that each system is ready for operations. Although a large majority of the 52 systems have received at least an initial authorization to operate, significant assessment work remains. According to the Bureau, 9 systems will have to have their security controls reassessed to account for additional development work prior to the 2020 census, and 5 systems are still awaiting that initial authorization. I'd like to note that we've been encouraged that the Bureau is coordinating closely with the Department of Homeland Security on cyber issues. DHS has provided this assistance through cyber threat intelligence and information sharing, and through conducting incident management and vulnerability assessments, among other activities. All of these internal and external assessment efforts, including recent evaluation performed by the Commerce Department's Office of the Inspector General, are vital, especially since the majority of the Bureau's systems that will support 2020 operations contain personally identifiable information. At the end of the day, however, they will only be as valuable as the corrective actions the Bureau takes in response to them. We recently made 2 recommendations to the Bureau calling for management attention in this area. The first called for the Bureau to address its security to-do list in a timelier manner, and the second called for the Bureau to establish a more formal process for tracking and completing actions in response to DHS assessments. The Bureau reported that it is working to implement our recommendations. If fully implemented, the Bureau will be better positioned to ensure that assessments will result in high-priority improvements to its cybersecurity posture. In summary, we're running short on time before key census operations begin. Moving forward, it will be critical for the Bureau to devote enough attention and effort to completing IT system development activities and implementing cybersecurity improvements in a timely and prioritized way. Mr. Chairman, this concludes my statement.
Again, I want to thank all the witnesses. Mr. Dillingham, just real quickly, you sounded pretty confident, which I like to hear. There are still issues and concerns. Would you like to start off by just addressing some of the issues raised by GAO in their testimony?
Well, I think and we do agree. We've agreed with the recommendations, and they say we're making progress, and the faster we make progress, the better. At the same time, one of the things that we're doing at the Census Bureau, their concerns generally represent potential risks. And we're engaged in risk management at the Bureau in all sorts of ways, with our IT systems, with our cybersecurity, and with our operations as well. So in general, what I would like to say, we're managing the risk. This is a mammoth operation. There are many parts to this operation, and we have a great team in place, and we're making a lot of progress in managing our risk. There will be risk throughout the Census Bureau, the 2020 census, and there will also be risk in the Census Bureau continuing. As a matter of fact, I think the guidance from GAO is very helpful because it really reinforces the need for risk management. So in general, let me say that we agree that there are risks, and we're managing those risks, and we're making progress, and we will continue to make progress.
So I'd kind of like to just get a response out of GAO. You're obviously laying out these issues. You're never going to mitigate all risks. You can't eliminate all of them. You can manage it. Are you fairly confident that the Census Bureau is managing those risks, that we will be able to move forward and have an accurate census? I mean, what's your level of confidence?
Yeah, I think it's encouraging that the Bureau has agreed with the recommendations that we've made. Our recommendations have been focused on process improvements. So that is to say, we have acknowledged in prior reports the establishment of a risk management framework at the Bureau. So in particular, with respect to cybersecurity, we've seen the Bureau take many actions to assess what are the highest risk areas and then take actions for them. Our process improvements are really aimed at recognizing the fact that there's limited time until Census Day, limited resources, and so the importance of really ensuring that priority is placed on the highest and most critical vulnerabilities and improvements that are needed.
Maybe the better way of putting this, what level of concern should this committee have about the success of the census in 2020? Should we have a relatively high level of confidence? Again, not saying it's going to be perfect, but are we facing any kind of disasters you're concerned about?
I would say trust but verify and look for some key indicators out there. I think, as Nick said, it's look for the testing and the actions that they are taking to correct some of the IT and cybersecurity issues. Continue to monitor the census preparations. Now the census is going live. Look to see if the census stays on schedule. All these key operations need to take place when they're supposed to. Because of immutable, these statutory deadlines, there's no opportunities for resets, do-overs. I think that if the Census Bureau gets the response rate, a decent response rate, and that there's no cybersecurity incident or IT shortfall, I think the Census Bureau will be positioned for a cost-effective head count. So I don't think we're looking at disaster, but it's still a lot of work needs to be done going forward, and Census is aware of that.
You talked about cost-effective. One of the things that will drive cost-effectiveness will be the success of the self-response, online self-response. In order to promote that, what is the Census Bureau doing? Do you have planned promotion campaign, advertising, how much you're going to be spending? Mr. Dillingham.
Mr. Chairman, we have all the above and more. This is going to be the largest outreach campaign that the Census Bureau has ever conducted, about a $500 million outreach media campaign that will be television, it will be radio, it will be print, it will be social media, et cetera. And the messages we're presenting are consistent with what I had just summarized as the easy, safe, and important. And we're going to particularly stress the safe. I think it's very important that we stress the safety factor, that your data is protected, confidentiality is protected. We have a history of protection. We got the laws, everything in place to protect the data. But at the same time, in using the new options we have, it's very important that everyone realize the paper option still exists. But in addition to that, we now have the internet option and the telephone option. And in the 2018 end-to-end test, actually most people responded by internet. I'm not saying that same demographics exist everywhere, but that was an instance where we conducted the test without publicity, without media, and without outreach. And we got over 50% of the people responding on the internet. So that's one of the features that the public needs to understand and take advantage of. It also, it may get into a discussion with reaching the hard to count. And it's very important with the hard to count. Even though there are rural areas and there are tribal areas where connectivity may be an issue, or definitely an issue, as well as even telephone coverage at times. At the same time, these options allow us to take the technology to go into those communities to reach the hard to count. They don't have to come to our area office to get assistance. They can get it by phone. They can respond by phone, and yes, they can do it on the internet. And these are two important new developments that I think will make a world of difference. It's more cost effective, it saves the taxpayer dollars, and is far more efficient.
Well, the internet has progressed a lot since the last census. The public has obviously gotten much more used to it. To me, the online does represent the risk from a standpoint, do we have the capacity to handle it? And we saw that with healthcare.gov. The system just simply wasn't set up to handle the initial response. So that's all I asked Geo. Do we have the capacity? Are you confident about that? As well as in terms of cybersecurity, that would be the portal that the public can certainly get into the Census Bureau. Do we have the firewalls within that portal as well?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, I believe so. I think the Bureau is taking the right steps towards ensuring that they have the bandwidth that can handle a potential spike in the number of respondents that may come in through the internet. They're taking efforts to secure their systems as well. 2 quick points on this are going to be, though, that there's a lot of work still left to do. So a lot of testing, not only on specific systems, but to make sure that those systems work well together. And then also to have a backup plan, so as a disaster recovery plan as well. We're waiting to get more details from the Bureau on plans with respect to that.
Thank you, Senator Peters.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just want to expand on the issue of hard to count and the fact that we're relying so much on the internet initially. And I know you went through all of the steps that will be available, the other options that will be available. But the question is, and maybe be more specific so I get a better sense of this, because in Michigan we have 800,000 people who are considered hard to count. Many of them don't have access to the internet, certainly not broadband issues. But how do you follow up with folks who don't have that access? But when will you know they don't have access? How do you then reach out in person? How are they going to know they're going to need to do it by phone or by mail? It still seems to be a very person-intensive type of process. And you have to identify who doesn't have access to the internet. How do you actually doing that? Help me walk through the process as to how we're going to ensure this, please.
Senator, let me give you the example of Detroit.
Yeah.
We've been to Detroit. We met with the local leaders, some members of Congress and others. And I'm using Detroit, and I don't mean it in any way that may be that anyone would disagree with in Detroit. There's a lot of wonderful things going on with revitalization.
Absolutely.
However, Detroit has lost 1 million population since 1950. Each decennial census, their population has gone down. They were at over 1.8 million people and are now at just over 800,000. And it's a very large geographical area of more than 140 square miles. So some of those neighborhoods are the hard to count neighborhoods.
Right.
And so what we did in Detroit is with the complete count committees and the partnerships that we have in Detroit, I went out to view those hard to count, and we rode around on a Sunday morning, and we went to the civic centers, and Detroit has divided its territory, its city into about 7 districts, and they're reinvigorating a sense of community. They have community centers, etc. They have, the churches are still, some are very vibrant, even though the populations have dropped. We can take the technologies into those areas, and we are working with the partners in the city of Detroit. So working together, our partnership specialists and these support groups and partners, which are many in Detroit, we can go right into those hard-to-count communities. And I've seen the boarded-up houses, I've seen the homes that were destroyed, and we know there's homeless populations there, but we can reach them better than ever. Now, I will mention one thing, that in this area, that we have doubled the number of partnership specialists who we see working directly with those communities, can identify these needs and respond. The Appropriations Committee asked us if we received additional funding, what would we do? What would be our priority, especially in rendering additional assistance? And we developed a potential plan that is not in our budget. It's a $90.5 million figure to it. where we would take our recruiters, our temporary employees, and we would allow them to continue by helping our partnership specialists and going into those communities, and that would increase the workforce by 5,000. So it's not the federal presence that makes a difference, but the federal presence helps. So when working with our partners in those jurisdictions, we do take the technology to the hard to count, and we also will be in our commercials tailoring it to the hard to count groups, to the ethnic groups, to different age groups, et cetera, and reminding people, please always count your children, for example. The counting of children, I'm amazed, but has been a problem since 1850 when it was recorded. It is still a problem. We are not sure of all the dynamics, but the changing household structure in our modern life and other things, people, if children are living with relatives or others, they sometimes don't put them down. And we need to make sure we're counting all the children. We're partnering with the AC Foundation and others, pediatricians. We're working with all sorts of groups to make sure that all the people are counted.
Well, I'm pleased to hear your partnership approach, because that's absolutely critical. The people who know those communities the best are a number of the organizations that you mentioned, the churches in particular, that are closely connected in a lot of ways with the heart and soul of those communities. Their assistance is going to be essential. I know you've been making great strides in Detroit and some of our other urban areas, but that sounds as if that will continue to be a central focus of the census going forward.
Yes, I mean, we're still in the process, and one of the things that I want to mention is that we have the capability on our website for the public in all jurisdictions across the country to monitor their self-response while the census is going on. So we can target those hard-to-count areas electronically. It's on our website. You can find the tracks and see what the response rate is on a daily basis.
Great. The other issue that we have to deal with is trust, obviously, in the census, or it's not going to be accurate. Unfortunately, many Americans mistrust government just generally, and the Bureau must focus its public communications and outreach to build that kind of trust. Mr. Goldenkopf, the Bureau and the GAO have identified negative public perception of the census as one of the top risks. I think you've talked about that in some of your opening comments as well. That could increase cost as well. There are many folks that think some of the chaos that we've been seeing lately regarding questions on the Senate is adding to mistrust as well. My question to you is, do you believe that there is a significant public perception risk that the Bureau must deal with and counteract in 2019, this year, and what should they be doing?
Absolutely. There's definitely a public perception risk. We've all seen the public dialogue of late. Certainly has not created an environment. But more, I think as importantly, it's the Census Bureau's own study when they looked at barriers and attitudes and motivators to participate in the census. That's exactly what they came up with. They did a survey of around 50,000 people. They also conducted focus groups, and some of the top 3 barriers relate to trust, and that's what the Census Bureau needs to overcome. So, for example, there's concerns over data privacy and confidentiality. There are concerns, fear of repercussions, that if you participate in the census, something bad will happen to you. And then the third factor is distrust of all levels of government. And so even without the current issues going on in the world, there has always been this layer of difficulty and just a distrust of the government. And so that's something when the partnership specialists go out and when they hit the street, when they start talking to constituents, that's, I think, one of the greatest functions that they provide, because they are the trusted voice in the community, and they can reach out to people in their community. And we've seen in past censuses that they do a fantastic job of that. And so that's kind of going to be the challenge going forward.
But given the recent incidents you mentioned, we've seen an increase of confusion related to some of the chaos we've seen. Should they be taking action now?
Well, I think the Census Bureau is doing that.
At an elevated level, though, because of what's happened.
I think so. And I think one of the things that has us concerned is the rate of hiring of the partnership specialists. Their goal was to hire 1,500 partnership specialists by, I believe, the end of June. And they've made hiring offers to 813 now have come on board out of that. I think it's 1,510 is the precise number. But 782 are in the queue. And the full complement of partnership specialists won't come on board till as late as September 1st. So they're already behind the curve. And as you mentioned, this is a very labor-intensive operation. When you think 1,500 partnership specialists, that does sound like a lot, but when you think of both in terms of the populations that they need to hit, they want to reach nationwide a goal of 300,000 partnerships. And, you know, if you think of the number of counties that there are in the country, it's roughly 2 partnership specialists per county. And on top of that, they're also doing clerical chores too as well. So they definitely have their work cut out for them, and they're already starting a little bit behind the curve. And so one of the things we'll be looking at going forward is the extent to which they're able to hire at that pace, get everybody on board quickly, get up to speed, retain those people. And I would say, you know, if the money is there, I mean, certainly having additional partnership specialists would certainly help the case.
Great, thank you.
Gentlemen, Dr. Dillingham, I want to run through about 100 questions with you, so we're going to hustle through several here. Let me get some concise answers. Talk me through the breakdown of what you anticipate here. Email connections or reminders, web-based reminders, phone calls. How will people, what's your first estimate, besides paper, of how people will actually fill out their census forms?
Senator, in filling it out, and really the experience we have would be the Rhode Island experience, where about a little over 50% replied by internet. And this is without the outreach campaign.
And this is web-based, them logging into a site.
I can't say that they may have done it by.
No, I'm just saying, what do you estimate? So if they're still logging into a site, is an app that they're downloading, or?
It could be that high. It could be that high nationally. We don't really have an official estimate. The telephone usage there was much lower than you might think. It was close to 7% by telephone. And then.
And that's getting a number, punching it in, and saying, and talking to someone, or it's all about punching it?
Actually, if they're punching in, filling in the form by their smartphone, we call that internet. And if they're going to the phone assistance center, that's another proposition where they can get advice for filling it out on the internet, or they can give the information right there on the phone to the person who will record it for them.
So let me review. On your phone or on your computer, actually logging into a certain place, saying, this is my address, this is who I am, filling out the form, or going onto the phone and actually calling in and talking someone through.
Exactly.
Okay, and then that doesn't work, then you're actually getting a physical form. When is a form actually physically mailed to you?
For about 20, sorry on the microphone.
You're fine.
For
That mic's
about
fine.
20% of the jurisdictions where there is low connectivity, we will send the form out with the first mailing. There's a total of 5 mailings. If we don't hear from you, you're going to receive 5 mailings.
First mailing starts when?
The first mailing would start in March, and they really the exact days, but every week you're going to get a mailing if we don't hear back from you, and the fourth mailing usually would be when you get the actual form. So there is an encouragement. Okay. You can go do it on the internet or by phone, or you'll get a mailing.
Go online or go on the phone, do it. And if you
That's
haven't, the fourth time, you're going to get a form and say, can you fill this out and send it back in?
That's correct.
Then after that, someone physically is
And then there's another reminder.
Right.
And sometimes when they receive the reminder, they will still do it, and there's an overlap between that and what we call the non-response follow-up. NRFU is the phraseology we use within the agency. But there's sometimes, too, when the person first goes to the door in the non-response follow-up and puts a notice on the door, hey, we'd like to talk to you about the census, they will get online.
They will fill it out.
And they will.
All right, so let me ask this question. I don't need an answer to it. I just
Sure.
want to be able to drop this out for you and for GAO. For years, I have asked the question, April the 1st is Census Day for us officially. April the 15th, there's also another large event that happens nationwide every single year, not every 10 years. It'd be nice if it was every 10, but it's every single April 15th. There's also a nationwide event. We have about 140 million people that do a filing with the IRS. 127 million of those are electronically. So round numbers, around 140 million file it, 127 million electronically. That seems like a unique opportunity for Census and for IRS to cooperate together once every 10 years to see if the census information couldn't be added to their IRS form And to get a very large group, 127 million households is a pretty big catch to have by April the 15th, and then to go chase after that. Tell me why that wouldn't work.
Senator, I'm not here to tell you why it wouldn't work, but I would tell you that we're here to explore whether it will work and how it can work.
Okay. Obviously, that's a 2030 question, but if we don't start setting that up now, we're not going to get there. But we spend how much on the census this year? What's your estimate? Cost?
It's close to $15 billion, Senator.
So my
I mean,
hope,
for the total life cycle cost.
right, my hope is if we can gather a significant number of people by combining their IRS filing and their census filing, we can deal with a lot of personnel issues on that every 10 years. And I don't understand why we couldn't do that. I only bring that to you to say, I know right now the fire that's in front of you is next year.
Yes, sir.
But as you discuss and do after-action reports, I'd love for someone to get into the conversation, could these two be combined?
Senator, let me just tell you this at this point, and the different permutations or ways that might be achieved have yet to be explored and analyzed, but I have been informed that there have been some conversations with private tax preparer services already, for example, that they could have the link at the end of the electronic form to the census.
Right.
And that would be maybe a starting point for getting to the goal that you mentioned.
Right. There's a pretty straightforward way to be able to do this. Again, there's a tremendous number of people that are used to electronically filing
Yes.
on their taxes, and that we could gather all that census information at the same time. Let me ask your question about hiring, as was just brought up by GAO. It's actually one of my questions on it. 2010, hiring temporary workers for the census was much easier because our unemployment rate was so high in 2010. Our unemployment rate is historically low right now. It's some of the lowest in 50 years. We have millions more job openings than we have people to fill it. How's that going for you, just in hiring and finding temporary workers?
Senator, so far we've been pleasantly surprised. One of the reasons is we hire people on a temporary basis, and so we're really not, the unemployment pool is not our, perhaps not even our primary pool. I would have to study that. But we're getting retirees. We're getting people that already work time. We're getting Uber and Lynx drivers and different people that work part-time jobs and look forward to these jobs. In terms of the applicant pool, actually, we have extended offers to more than 1,600 partnership specialists.
Right.
So we're waiting to see how soon that
To
will
get the
pan
rest
out.
of the information out, let me ask you one more question.
Sure.
Because so much is going to be done by web-based and
Sure.
on the phone this next time, which I'm good, that'll help us with tremendously with efficiency. It also opens up the opportunity for phishing scams, for people to put up fake sites and say, this is the census site, to email out to their blast list, do robocalls out to individuals and say, give us all your information, we're the census. What are we doing in the census level to help get information to people out to say, this is official and this is not? This is somebody just fishing for your information.
Certainly, that'll be one of the things that will be part of our outreach campaign. It'll be part of our social media campaign, and we're also working with the agencies to address that, so we're alerted whenever there's a fake website or a phishing activity. We get alerted and we take immediate action, and our IT and our cyber folks are working on that every day.
Okay, thank you.
Yes.
Senator Hassan.
Thank you. Welcome to all of you, and thank you so much for your hard work. Dr. Dillingham, in New Hampshire, we were recently reminded of how every level of government has to prepare against cyber attacks in order to make sure that government operations remain constant. Just a few weeks ago, the Stratford County government experienced a cyber attack that took their systems offline. However, the Stratford County government had prepared for a cyber attack scenario ahead of time. They were able to implement a continuity of operations plan, in this case by reverting to pen and paper, allowing the government to continue its essential functions. While this New Hampshire county-level government operates on a different scale, to be sure, than the 2020 census, this event highlights an important lesson on resiliency at all levels of government. So, Dr. Dillingham, what has the Census Bureau done to improve the resiliency of the 2020 census? Does the Census Bureau have a continuity of operations plan should the online questionnaire suffer a cyber attack?
Senator, we do have a continuity of operations plan. The cyber attacks, primarily, our planning is to mitigate any damage. So we have built-in safeguards that the systems, parts of our system can immediately be closed down, and any issues that we experience can be contained. So that's part of our mitigation strategy. We do not, as yet, have a plan that the entire system, if it was to go down with specificity, and we're looking at what these dramatic options might be, but we are very carefully working on the, I won't say the more realistic, but the more probable threats that can occur, in both preventing them and containing them when they do occur. And we're following the best practices and working closely with the intelligence agencies, DHS, and the private sector as well. And we have relationships with them. So even the private sector will help us to identify these threats when they might occur. So we will be looking at the entire range, and we do have a continuity of operations scenario, but I would like to examine more carefully the catastrophic scenario that you might be alluding to.
Well, then I'd like to follow up with that and with GAO on that. Just in the past, if any questions arose about the integrity of census data, there was a paper trail of all census reports. Yes. And obviously now with this online portal and systems, the Census Bureau needs other mechanisms for keeping these records. So in the event of a cyber incident, is part of your plan to go back, or I guess the question is, how would you go back and validate census responses if you find that the information you've collected online has been potentially compromised?
Senator, some of the specifics I'd like to get back to you with, but we do have redundancies built into our system, and we do have information stored, for example, on the cloud as well as at a facility. So we do have redundancies built in, but I'd rather discuss those maybe with you and your staff.
And I would look forward to that and discussing it with GAO because I think, again, just having the planning in place and really thinking this through is going to be critically important. I want to move on to one other topic. We have talked about some of the hard-to-count populations. It's obviously very important as we talk about that to make sure that the census is accessible to everyone. This is particularly important for individuals who experience disabilities, who may face additional barriers to successfully complete a traditional census form and be counted, or go online. If you're not able to type, that presents its own kind of challenges. In addition, because the census does not ask about disability, it's impossible to measure an undercount of people who experience disabilities, similar to undercounts that may be calculated for other hard-to-count populations. So, Doctor, can you explain how the Census Bureau plans to address this particular concern, including any targeted outreach to individuals who experience disabilities, and how individuals who are self-responding may receive assistance to complete their census form when that form is not accessible?
Senator, we do a lot of that through our partnerships, and we will be partnering with organizations that have as a primary interest and as a side interest reaching the populations, the disabled, and those with other forms of disabilities. We also, to some extent, our backup is the enumeration. Now, when we do the enumeration, if they're not able to submit either electronically or by phone or by paper, and we come knocking on the doors, and if they could be in a group facility, for example, or they could be an individual's residence, we will find a way to get those people to be able to answer the census. I would compare it to a very rare language. Even though we're going to have assistance in many different languages, there are communities that I've heard of where there's less than 200 people maybe in this country that speak that language. And what we do is we reach out to the community, to the universities, we find the special talent that we need, and we would do that with people that suffer from visual disabilities and other physical disabilities as well, and reach out, and we do have mechanisms by which in the enumeration we can reach those very hard to groups to count, And we have ways of getting those special assistance to them.
Well, that is reassuring to hear, and I think what will be important, because I think no one doubts the census's intentions here or desire to reach all of these communities and people who may need this kind of assistance. I think if, to the degree you all can be transparent about where your partnerships are,
Okay.
there are a lot of people in the disability community who would be very willing to make sure that they are bolstering those partnerships too. So I'd look forward to further
Thank
discussion
you.
about that.
And Senator, let me just clarify, we already have some of those partnerships.
sure you do,
And
yeah.
we will be putting our partnerships on the website and the internet, and we'll make sure that the public is aware of that.
All right, thank you so much. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Senator Hawley.
Mr. Dillingham, let me ask you about the strategies related to counting for the census counting in rural areas, particularly portions of my state of Missouri. So, for instance, almost 550,000 people in Missouri are considered hard to count. That's almost 9% of my state. What happens in those areas, and multiple counties, by the way, what happens in those areas where you not only have a rural population where maybe the mail is not, there are non-traditional mailing addresses and so forth, but then you also have limited internet access. So, for instance, from 2013 to 2017, over 20% of Missouri's households either had no internet subscription or only a dial-up subscription. What's the strategy for counting there?
Senator, we have a multifaceted strategy, particularly in the rural hard-to-count areas. One is that we have already studied the nation in those areas that have limited connectivity, and for 20% of the nation, as I mentioned, we're going to mail out the questionnaire in the first instance to them. But we also, you know, in one of the things that in the time I didn't have to address in talking about the partnership specialists are really our connection to the community. The community, we envision more than 300,000 partnerships. It can range from the local barbershop to a national organization, and we have the complete count committees. The last I looked, I think we have 2,500 complete count committees already. Every state has a complete count committee with the exception of 2, and we hope they'll come on board soon, but they're local governments. And they have rural populations, but their local governments have many complete count committees. So our partnership specialists are really our connector to the complete count committees, to the various groups, the nonprofits, the service organizations, the partners across the country. And I must confess to you, we could not conduct this census without the assistance of our partnerships and the people that are helping us. So what we want to do is have that multiplier effect through our partnership specialists. But in addition to that, we have the outreach media campaign, and in a lot of the rural areas that I have learned by visiting them, some listen to the radio more than they watch TV, and different things like that. So we have to be able to do that and provide the media that reaches them best. And then, assuming we have this multiplier effect with either partnership specialist assistance or using the community groups, we can take the technology to them. I went to one jurisdiction in New Mexico, very rural area, and Senator Udall from New Mexico went with me. That was an extreme example of a hard-to-count area, and that's why we went there. And we determined to get self-reporting in that. The only 2 mechanisms that we saw at the time was the local grocery store and service station as well as the church. This was a community that didn't want people coming in, and there were all sorts of barriers to people coming in. They did not trust the government, and so when we saw that, we are working with our partnership specialists. We need efforts at the grocery store. We need efforts with the local churches. Now, that is an extreme example. I'm not sure if that's in Missouri, but I know there are hard-to-reach areas of Missouri, and we will work with the local officials, and we will work with the groups to make sure we reach them.
Thank you very much. That's very helpful. Let me ask you about the effect of natural disasters and accuracy in census counting. When you have flooding, when you have tornadoes that displace people, sometimes for long periods of time from their homes, particularly true with flooding, but can also be true with rebuilding after a tornado. Both of those natural disasters have hit my state and particularly devastating effect. We have lots of people who are displaced in the state. How do you tackle that and account for that displacement?
that can pose a lot of challenges, and we're working on that presently. We're working on that with Puerto Rico, where we're doing an update leave. We're actually going to every residence in Puerto Rico. We're doing that in Mexico City, northern area of Florida, where the hurricane had devastating impacts, and we're doing it in California, where the fires had burned out some housing areas totally. So we work with those communities. There are issues there, and sometimes with the local jurisdictions, we're working particularly with Florida right now. They came to my office, a delegation, they say, hey, these people have moved out. We'd like to have them counted where they were. That poses a problem for us. But what we do is we work with them. Any that come back at census time and are living there and reestablished, we can count them. But at the same time, we're also informed, for example, that working crews are coming there for 2 or 3 years to help build back the area. You count the working crews. It's whoever's living in that jurisdiction. So we'll work with those communities and find out what's best. We look forward to, if in your state and other states, in working with you on planning that.
Very good. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
And Senator Hawley, in my written opening statement, I referred to the ongoing cooperation and oversight that we've been conducting with the Census Bureau and Government Accountability Office. And over the course of the last couple of years, through that communication, through that collaboration, my confidence has certainly grown that we don't have some disaster on our hand here, that this is pretty well in hand. And I think one of the things I'd like both GAO and Mr. Dillingham to comment on this, but this isn't the Census Bureau's first rodeo. They're not reinventing the wheel. You talk about community partnerships. I mean, this has been in place decade after decade, and you're just going back to these tried and true methods, as well as using and trying to implement technology that has improved dramatically since 2010, when, let's face it, that didn't work too well. So I do want to obviously have this committee hearing point out the difficulties so that we remain diligent and we stay on top of things. But I also think it's important to communicate to the public that we do have things in a manageable situation, and I don't think anybody should be panicking. I'll ask GAO, am I wrong in this assessment?
No, I think we would agree with that. The Census Bureau has a very strong management team. As you say, this is not their first rodeo. This is their second, third, maybe fourth rodeos in some cases. There's a lot of experience going into the decennial census. There will be some glitches. It happens all the time with something this massive. There are a lot of moving parts. But having all that experience in the management team there, the hope is that they will be able to address it quickly, and that's what's happened in the past, and so not to panic. I think, and this is something that Dr. Dillingham mentioned in his opening statement, how they work with the oversight organizations. And, this is actually my third census. I started this in 2000, and I think the tone is much different. It started to change in the 2010 census, and we're seeing that continue into the 2020 census. Much greater willingness to work with oversight folks. We put GAO put the Census Bureau, the 2020 census, on its high-risk list. They're not being defensive about it. They're actually embracing. They're embracing being on the high-risk list. They're saying, hey, this is a cry for help. We need the resources. They're working with us. We share our best practices in a range of different management areas, everything from cost estimation to scheduling to IT management. Dr. Dillingham met with the head of our organization. We meet with Dr. Dillingham on a monthly basis just to share information. We're not adversaries on this. We're really all on the same side here in favor of a good census. So agree with you 100%.
I think one of the concerns is you go back to 2010, I wasn't around, but the stories you hear of the implementation of technology, we spent $3 billion. It was a total disaster. But can you think back 10 years ago, we were talking about flip phones and BlackBerries, not iPhones, not this level of sophistication, both in terms of the devices, the technology, the software, as well as the public's ability to use. So does anybody want to kind of compare and contrast that, or anybody in position to do so? Mr. Marinos.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, I think that's a really important point. As you know better than anyone, GAO's had cybersecurity on its high-risk list since 1997. I don't think that's going anywhere anytime soon. The risks have continued to grow. in many ways, the innovations that the Bureau has pursued over the last decade are essential innovations, really to try to ensure an accurate count and to get a good response rate. So we are encouraged by those efforts. I think one thing that I would come back to that I mentioned in the opening statement as well is that we're very encouraged by the Bureau's effort to reach out to others to gain assistance. So in particular with DHS, many of the assessments that DHS have done have been voluntary ones that the Bureau has sought out that assistance from DHS. So we're very encouraged by that effort.
So I don't want to tip anybody's hands here, but can you, in your mind, do you have a list of priority risks when it comes to cybersecurity? I mean, is it that online, self-response portal? Are there other things? I mean, what are the most significant cyber risks?
Well, I think the reliance on the internet are creating many of those risks, but I would say that based on DHS's assessments, the Bureau's own internal assessments, those done by the IG and recommendations we've made, I believe the Bureau has a good sense of what those risks are. I think where we have sort of felt like better attention needs to be made by management is on ensuring that they prioritize those risks. Some of those risks are going to be very specific, so a system that needs a patch is going to have to get patched. Others are going to be longer term. So if some adjustments need to be made within a program, need to hire more individuals because they identify a new security risk exists, those are going to take more time. But I think from our perspective, I think that focus of ensuring that the Bureau itself knows what the priorities are, communicates it not only to Bureau leadership, but to department leadership, I think that's what's essential.
So Director Dillingham, what do you think is the greatest cyber risk or risks that you're dealing with here in 2020 census?
Mr. Chairman, I am not sure what the greatest is, but I want to endorse the comments just made and the need for us to continuously evaluate and prioritize the risk. This is a day and age where you don't know. I must confess, watching television last night, and they had experts on TV discussing the ongoing cyber war between nations. There are certain things that may be unpredictable. That's one of the reasons that we always we identify the risk, we prioritize, and we have the risk registries that GAO strongly endorses so that we can continuously evaluate. And if we get indicators as to what the risk may be from the intelligence agency or others, we can act on it quickly. So I can't say...
So you have a priority list, but then also you're going to remain flexible to emerging risks.
That's correct. And with the 2020 census, we have an overall risk registry of 29 major risk categories. But we have, when you get down to the numbers, we scan for 100,000 risk every month. And in the last year, there are different types of risk, but in the last year, I've seen figures where we have responded to approximately 150,000 risks. Now, many of those are really IT risk that can be quickly resolved. Some others, we have a process, we call it a planning and a plan of action that we put together, and we establish the milestones. GAO looks at our milestones, and they remind us if we're not meeting our milestones, but we're doing that ourselves as well. So we're always managing the risk with the best information, the most knowledge, and the most expertise, and I think some of the best new tools ever.
In GAO's testimony, they were talking about the computer system for the hiring process. We spoke over the phone about where you are in terms of hiring the people, and you are actually quite optimistic about that. You want to talk about the computer system, but you also want to talk in general about where the Bureau is in terms of its hiring.
Sure. One of the innovations, important innovations we have this time is that people can apply online, and we're advertising that, and we ask you and others to advertise that fact. Go to our website, 2020 Census /i.gov.
We'll let
anyway,
you get that, and we'll let
that's
you advertise
right.
that later.
But what we have, and I am pleased to tell you that when I looked at the figures this morning, we had 600,000 people have applied for jobs. Now, we're in the process of hiring 60,000 of those to be what we call listers or canvassers. So that is a monumental time saver, cost saver way of doing business.
So
however, we did have... Go ahead.
You're saying 600,000 have applied online?
That is correct.
So obviously that hiring portal is up, it's operating, it's already accepted 600,000 applications, and out of that, you're only going to hire a tenth of that?
Well, it is not all 600,000 was for that series of jobs, and I'm told about maybe 400,000 or half at least were. So we had about 5 or 6 potential applicants for each job. Now, when we get to the enumeration and we need close to 500,000 people, then we would like to have 2.5 million people in that database. And we're hoping we're going to achieve that, and we're going to be working that, particularly in the fall when it's time to engage that next hiring peak that we will experience.
Does your staff have that website that we want to highlight in the hearing yet?
If I wasn't under the lights here, I would have remembered. 2020census.gov/jobs.
Okay, sounds good. But I would think just kind of going on to the Census Bureau's overall website, you ought to be able to click onto that pretty
Mr.
easily as
Chairman,
well.
you had mentioned one other thing in starting that line of questioning about the importance of the experience and the depth and the partnerships. The team is deep at Census. There were an email this morning, there are 2 people that I was commending for working on their 7th decennial census. And some of our senior staff have multiple decennial censuses. Many of them have 4. And when we hire the people, the partnership specialists, and I go to Columbia, South Carolina, and the partnership specialists have purchased their own beautiful red blazers embroidered with 2020 census, and they're ready to go to work again. It is very encouraging and very motivational. And when they cook the cakes with the 2020 census, these people look forward every 10 years to coming back and working on the decennial census.
So were we hiring second graders back 7 decades ago?
Well, you would think so. It's a little bit deceiving because you can subtract 10 years. Many of them got their first experience in a decennial census. But there were a couple with 60 years.
Well, again, commend them for us.
Yes.
Thank them for their service. Let's talk a little bit about promoting that online
Sure.
Self-reporting, because I think that's huge. Well, and just self-reporting through the mailer as well. Exactly what is the census game plan there in terms of promotion, advertising? What are your messages?
Well, the overall messaging for the campaign is shape your future, start here. And that will be connected with the link to the 2020 census, where you can apply by internet. And so it is a reminder throughout the campaign is help shape your future, start here. So in many instances, you can link directly, and it'll have the link in the advertisement. In others, it may be on the air, in which they would repeat the website to go to. But there's going to be tremendous. We have one of the largest campaign contractors in this area, and we have subcontractors for all the hard-to-count populations, or at least large groups of them, and we think that people will go directly to that. In one city that I was in, they were just putting in Wi-Fi in the buses, and the city was saying, hey, we can put advertising in the buses, and people on their way to work can answer the census.
So let me make a suggestion. Okay, fine, save your future.
Sure.
Help the government save money, self-report.
Absolutely.
Okay, that at least resonate with me.
Absolutely. That is sometimes a hidden message, and maybe it should be more visible.
I like very overt messages, particularly when it comes to saving government money. Senator Carper.
I'm Tom Carper, and I approve that message. Every now and then, Dr. Dillingham, people say to me, let me say, first of all, Robert and Nicholas, thank you very much for being here. Thanks for the good work that you and your colleagues are always doing, and, as well as to the census folks. This brings back almost like deja vu 10 years ago when we had other folks sitting in this table, and we go through these, asked a lot of questions, and I'm pleased to hear that real progress has been made, appears to be being made on technology and the technology front to enable us to get a better result, a more accurate result maybe for less money, and that would be much appreciated. Dr. Dillingham, people ask me, not every day, not every week, but people say to me, what keeps me up at night? And what keeps you up at night? And not only that, what are a couple of things that keep you up at night? And what are a couple of things we can do here in the Congress to make sure you get a better night's sleep in the next year?
Thank you so much, and I know what a great supporter you are of the decennial census as well as the Census Bureau, and we very much appreciate that. We've had some conversations with regard to security and other things, and appreciate your keen interest in that. The thing that keeps me up at night is really making sure all the pieces in place and that we stay on schedule, on time, and on budget. That's the overall business plan, and it's an excellent plan developed over a decade, as the chairman mentioned, and so that's really it's all pieces of it that keep us up at night. Now, as far as supporting Congress, I want to thank the Congress for the demonstrated support, both financial and otherwise. But one of the things is, and was pointed out during this hearing, is we have to communicate this message to a much wider group, and Congress is well positioned to do that. We have delivered, for example, just it may be helpful, toolkits to every member of Congress on how they might work with their partners and others to get the job done. And we've seen members of Congress embrace this. We've seen some very healthy competitions. I know, for example, the mayor in Milwaukee was telling us when we were there that he has a friendly bet with, was going to enter into a friendly bet with the mayor of Minneapolis to see who could get the highest self-response rate. We've had members of Congress say that, we published the partnership list, and they say, I've got all these partners I'm working with, and I may be head of the Census Caucus, but I look at my neighboring congresswoman and friend, and that list is shorter, so I'm going to nudge them a little bit and say, we need a competition here. You need to catch up with me. So whatever the mechanisms are, just spreading the word and the message, again, that it's safe, and it's easy, and it's important, I think we're well positioned at this point. We have a definite path forward, and so I think that getting that message out, some people would speculate that even the attention that may be considered attention of disagreements on the census could in fact become beneficial, because people know now that the census is very important, and they will engage in helping us reach everyone.
Great, thank you. We'll be looking for the toolkit. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thanks for sending it to us. I understand. Thanks very much for talking with me earlier this week. But I understand that this new entity within DHS, the Department of Homeland Security, that goes by the name, the acronym CISA, CISA, which is the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency, which legislation that Chairman and I, others have partnered on. But we understand that CISA has partnered with the Census Bureau.
That's correct.
To prioritize the cybersecurity posture of the 2020 decennial census. And one of the tools that DHS has to help manage agency cybersecurity risk is something called the department's Einstein system. And I mentioned this to you, Einstein 1, which came along first. And I usually like to see you're a security guard at the gate. Vehicles are coming in and out of a particular location. And Einstein 1 basically says the security guards, a car's gone through.
Yes.
Our vehicle's gone through. Einstein 2 says a vehicle of interest has gone through. Einstein 3 says a car of interest has gone through, and let's stop that car. But I just say, can you give us an overview of how the Einstein systems, starting with Einstein 1, Einstein 2, Einstein 3, have been implemented in securing the information collected by the Bureau, if at all?
Yeah. Senator, I love your analogy on how that works, Einstein 1, 2, and 3. And Einstein has been mentioned publicly, but what I'd like to do is perhaps have my team come and speak with you and your staff on that. We have visited the DHS offices, and we made sure that everyone had the proper clearances, and so I'm not quite sure where the boundaries of the discussion might be. It's a sensitive topic. I'd be glad to talk with you about that. And
maybe when they come, they can bring another toolkit for us. Okay.
Okay.
You can never have too many. Have someone to gift to somebody else.
Yes.
All right. One of the major goals that my staff and I hope to achieve with this hearing is having both the Census Director and GO help us identify those milestones or really benchmarks, if you will, that we in the Congress at this moment need to monitor so that we can know whether the census remains on track for the 2020 count, and what are some of those benchmarks or milestones that we need to be monitoring?
Yes, sir.
Just give us an example of a couple.
Sure. Thank you.
So we'll know whether the census remains on track for the 2020 count.
That's correct.
Okay?
We will certainly keep you updated. I know GAO will, and we will as well at any time. We'll pass the information to you. And we're very pleased to say we're on track now, and we want to remain on track.
Yeah, let me just ask our other two witnesses, what are some of the benchmarks or milestones that we ought to be mindful of in watching?
Sure, Senator. So with respect to the two IT-related challenges that we've highlighted previously, on the systems readiness side, the next 6 months are pretty critical. We have, of those 16 operational deliveries, I think about 9 are going to have some pretty critical milestones themselves from an IT perspective. I think about 12 of those will also be in the midst of testing. So there's still a lot of work when it comes to sort of just ensuring that not only these systems have been developed, but they are scalable, their performance is going to work as intended. On the cybersecurity side, I think we still maintain our recommendation. We're encouraged that the Bureau is working towards implementing a recommendation that helps to formalize that good feedback that they're getting from DHS. I've reviewed all of the reports that DHS has produced for the Bureau. I think they're good recommendations, and so we'd just like to see how the Bureau intends to either address those recommendations head-on, or if they have other activities that may actually compensate for areas where DHS had findings.
Good, thanks. One more question, if I can, Mr. Chairman. One of the concerns I have, Dr. Dillingham, is ensuring that census enumerators are properly identified and that the public can trust that the person showing up at their house is indeed a credentialed Census Bureau employee. And just give us some idea what the Census Bureau is doing to ensure that the public can trust and verify that an enumerator knocking on their door, ringing on their doorbell is who they say they are.
Yeah. Senator, we totally agree with you on that. I have met with the International Associations of Chiefs of Police, and we do have some plans in process. One of the options that we're looking at is actually every police department across the nation has a roll call in the morning, and we're even actually thinking of videos that we can share with the local police and remind their officers, et cetera. But I did have a police chief, as I recall, in the state of Georgia, who specifically mentioned that. We went through a hard-to-count area. It happened to be a high-crime area, and he said, we need to know exactly your credentials, what they look like, and so we can make sure. And we've discussed with this with the Office of Inspector General. She agrees. We actually have in mind a joint letter coming from the IG as well as from the Census Bureau that would go out to all the law enforcement on that topic.
Good. Mr. Chairman, I don't know if y'all have in Wisconsin something called Text for Baby, Text, T-E-X-T, digit 4, baby. And I think it may have been an idea brainstorm from maybe Johnson & Johnson. And we use it in Delaware to try to make sure that parents are bringing their children in for doctor appointments. And a lot of the folks that are signed up on Medicaid, we have a lot of absenteeism. People make an appointment, they don't show up. And what we've done for years in Delaware now is Text for Baby, and we have the phone number of the parents, and they get text messages saying like 1 week from today, it's an appointment for your child, 3 days, tomorrow, and it actually works. I always like to say, find out what works, do more of that. Text for Baby works in this regard, and it might be just one more idea, one more tool in your toolbox that you want to think about.
Well, technology is a wonderful thing, and I appreciate you pointing out the security issue of, let's face it, strangers walking up, knocking on a door, and making sure that the American public understands, this is a census worker here. So, with the controversies that have been surrounding this particular census, I would, because I'm aware that a couple senators are still going to come back from a vote and want to ask some questions. So what I'd like to do is give the director a little chance to just lay out basics. I mean, those of us involved in this, we kind of understand these things, but let's just lay out some basics, starting with the laws in place to protect this information.
Sure.
This is not used, for other than, purposes other than what it's intended within the census. So I want you to cover that first.
Well, Senator, Title 13, when Congress passed those provisions back in the 1950s, it made it a very serious federal crime, 5 years in prison and $250,000 in fines for anyone who violates confidentiality. So the law in and of itself has a lot of teeth in it, and it has not, there's been no instance since then where the Census Bureau officials have been convicted of such a crime.
And again, the census goal is to enumerate, to count everyone in the country.
That is correct.
Citizen, non-citizen, to count everybody. And again, talk about that purpose and how and exactly how it's used, what it can be used for, what it can't be used for.
The data we collected is really very simple, and it's in Title 13 as well, and the recent executive order by the president recognizes it, puts it straight forward and front and center, that the uses are for statistical purposes. There's no law enforcement purpose whatsoever that this data can be used for. So at the end of the day, the Census Bureau produces aggregate statistics. We produce aggregate numbers. That's our product. So we collect data, data comes in, we analyze it, and a number comes out. And this number is not a personally identifiable information, data, number. It's group aggregate statistics. And we are embarked, and we've mentioned to members of Congress, in some additional protections that looking towards the future with enhanced computer capabilities and the matching of data with public and private data sets with large computer systems, we are putting in place some additional safeguards so that that will not be an option for people in the future.
But the numbers are obviously used to apportion House seats.
Exactly.
To, again, in aggregate number form to inform Congress in terms of public policy. But very specifically, you said law enforcement. We're talking about no form of law enforcement, not local, not state, not federal, not DHS. I mean, so again, just reinforce that point.
That is correct. Again, at the end of the day, public numbers. So whatever numbers go out, the entire country can use, or internationally they can use the data, and it will be aggregate data that you cannot violate someone's confidentiality and know their personal data from that. And it goes out, and we don't have any other information sharing arrangements or understandings, and so the public can look at the data and use it for policy making, decision making, but it is not used for law enforcement or any other purpose of that type.
So again, I think that's an important point to reinforce. So I'm going to go to GAO, who is taking a look at these things, to make that same point. Have you ever seen in your inspections of the Census Department, or Census Bureau, have you ever seen this information misused?
No, never. The Census Bureau goes to great lengths to maintain the privacy and confidentiality of the information, and it extends from, as Dr. Dillingham said, it's a one-way flow of information. The Census Bureau has access to other agencies' information, but other agencies can't access the Census Bureau's information. There are a lot of other structural safeguards as well. Mentioned that every person who works on the census, even GAO, others, we take an oath not to disclose the data, and that's a lifelong oath as well. We undergo training every single year, and if I don't take the training, the Bureau is quick to say, hey, you haven't taken the data stewardship training. So even in terms of where the Census Bureau locates its area census offices, they go to great lengths not to put them in buildings where there are other law enforcement agencies, again, to show that distance between the Census Bureau and other agencies. And then finally, once the data are released, there's a whole smorgasbord of things, steps that the Census Bureau takes so that the data doesn't get accidentally disclosed. If you get down to low levels of geography, it might be you can look at someone's house. It's the biggest house on the block there, and you know, under normal circumstances, you might be able to trace that back. But the Census Bureau does go through disclosures. They actually add noise to the database so that it's not possible to find information on that household. So we're really impressed with what they do.
So to summarize, the law is clear.
That's correct.
The law is strong, and the culture within the Census Bureau reinforces exactly that law in terms of this is a one-way street. Information comes in, but no personal information is released. It's not used by law enforcement for any purpose whatsoever. It's simply used for the purposes intended, stated in law in Title 13.
That's correct. An excellent summary.
As you said, it's a cultural thing too, and I think that's so important.
That's important. Again, we want to provide that assurance to the public because we want a full accounting. Senator Sinema.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chairman. Dr. Dillingham, Indian country is a special place,
Yes.
and the treatment of Native populations by the federal government is personal for me.
Sure.
The Navajo Nation in Arizona has a poverty rate of 38%, which is more than twice as high as the rest of the state of Arizona, and the median household income on the nation is only $27,389 per year. So members of the nation are guaranteed by treaty benefits such as healthcare and education. Arizona has more Bureau of Indian Education schools than any other state. In Lake Havasu, the Havasupai Elementary School has been under federal government control since 2002, and yet only 20% of students go on to graduate from high school. That's compared to 72% of American Indian students nationwide. And in 2018, the school only had one permanent teacher and one special education teacher for all 9 grades. I know personally the positive impact that a good education can have on someone's life. This information makes the historic undercount of American Indian and Alaska Native populations even more worrisome, as they depend on an accurate count to receive the funding that they're owed for education. In 2010, this population suffered an undercount of 4.88%, according to the GAO. So in 2016, it was announced there'd be 2 tests in Indian country in preparation for the census. These tests were to measure a proposed tribal enrollment question, and quoting from census materials, quote, test the integration of systems for the update enumerate operation, where census field staff visits households to update the list of addresses and count the people at the address. This operation typically occurs in areas where we have a low likelihood of mail delivery, end quote. These tests were canceled and the question abandoned due to budgetary uncertainty. What were the impacts of instituting the Update Enumerate program in Indian country without previous testing?
Let me, if I can, I'll start more generally about, you're exactly correct that the Navajo Nation is a very hard-to-count population. And I went to a portion of the Navajo Nation in New Mexico, and I know it stretches across Arizona all the way to the Grand Canyon. And as I mentioned in my opening statement, it's the size of West Virginia. So, and I have seen, and I've ridden through areas along with the vice president of the Navajo Nation, who I could not have been more impressed with his dedication and motivation to making sure everyone is counted. We actually went down some of those dirt roads and some of those very rural areas where there is no plumbing, sometimes no electricity, and sometimes not accessible by vehicle. And so I have seen, I went to a home wherein only the Navajo language was spoken, and they were building beside the home some other structures for other members of the family that needed to be counted. So we need to make sure that everyone's counted once they reach that home. But I did hear from that individual also that not only they have problems with connectivity, internet connectivity, but they said they had to go stand on top of the doghouse with their cell phone to get coverage in that area. So I've seen these challenges, and we have talked with the officials, particularly in that chapter of the Navajo Nation that was nearest west of Albuquerque, and investigating. And I will say that there was a broadband provider that had the cable actually on the nearby land ready to run it, and in that particular instance, it appears that they would have their facilities connected in time for the decennial census, which would be a mammoth improvement. It's where their courts and all their functions were. Now, back to the 2016 tests that were canceled, that predates me by several years. However, and I understand that for budgetary reasons they were, but I would not, my understanding of those tests, they were multifaceted. One was, in fact, to with the populations that they were looking at, there were some other issues with regard to enrollment into the tribal population. And I know that there were some Native American organizations and maybe tribes that that wasn't an interest area of theirs, and others it was. In addition to that, it was really testing out the operations, and my understanding it was by and large reaching them in this very tough geographic location. And sometimes members of the tribe, especially for the enrollment purpose, they may live in Albuquerque during the week and go back and forth with their relatives, so they were being counted outside the reservation, and that was of concern also to the Native Americans. But I will say that we have tested our systems, and our systems were working, and so we have learned, even though we did not test in those jurisdictions, but it still leaves the issue on reaching them. So what we're doing with our partnership program is we're hiring people from the tribes that can reach them or that work with them. And in one instance, and it was the one that I visited, we had an IT person from the tribe who was assisting the tribe with these options. In some cases, it may be that if they can't establish connectivity with a telephone or through the internet with a computer, then we hope they will mail back the forms and we will provide the language assistance. But even if that doesn't happen, we actually send the enumerators out. And that is no simple task, and I've heard some stories about that, and one of our enumerators walking 5 miles through the desert when her car broke down. So I want to both commend these enumerators, but say that it's a mammoth job to reach some of these populations. I sympathize with you. I'm not sure if there's any disadvantage as a result of that particular test being canceled at that time, but we will work with you and make sure that you're in your state, that we do everything possible through our partnership program, through our outreach program, as well as in the mailing options. And in those instances, as I mentioned earlier, we send out the questionnaire in the very first mailing if they have low internet connectivity in that geographic area. So we will do everything we can. We want to work with you and your local officials, state officials, local officials, tribal officials, to make sure everyone is counted.
Well, thank you for that answer. This is particularly important, as you mentioned, on the Navajo Nation. Many residents in Indian country lack an address.
Yes.
And so it is especially difficult for the Census Bureau to identify those households. And of course, as you alluded to, the non-response follow-up is incredibly important in these very remote areas. So I will take you at your word and ask that we work closely together as we head into the census. As you noted, the Navajo Nation is the largest nation in all of Indian country, and unfortunately has had fairly dismal census cooperation and returns in past years. This is very important to us. Census Bureau focus group documents have discussed what they call unusual respondent behavior and fears of how the government may use the information that's collected next year. One document that I reviewed showed that field staff have requested additional support to help overcome some of this mistrust in communities, particularly communities of color in Arizona. How has the Census Bureau addressed the issues raised by field staff in the areas of concern around distrust and requests for additional staffing? And what are you doing to ensure that American Indians and Alaska Natives are reached carefully and that their concerns around mistrust of the government's use of this information is allayed before the census occurs?
Senator, that's, again, an excellent question. You referenced our focus groups, and it sounded like the research maybe that you were referring to was a product of some of the focus group activities. And we've had more than 120 focus groups across the country, including with Native Americans. Those have been very important. The direct intent of those focus groups are for purposes of our media campaign. How best can we reach them? In some instances, like in New Mexico, we find it's radio as versus TV, et cetera, because if they have a vehicle, they typically have a radio. Sometimes they rely on that radio, and that's the best mechanism. So the outreach campaign will have that, but we will have special materials. We will have, again, it's integrated with the partnership specialists. We will hire specialists from those communities and from those tribes. Also the distribution of our materials during NERFU will be extremely important. And I know that when I was in the Navajo country there, we even went to the health centers, and they recognize the importance of that facility when people come for health services, that also could be a place where they could be informed about the census, and we would have the capability of sharing the census information either by phone, internet, or by the hard copy, that we could set up perhaps a census day there through our partnership specialists. So there are many different ways that we're going to try to reach that hard-to-count community, but we look forward to working with you. Probably the most important one, I would say, in many ways, is the trusted voices. So both in the media and the partnership specialists, et cetera, and the complete count committees. And I do think I do know that there are complete count committees, and I will discover what particular one the Navajo Nation may have. They may have several, but through those mechanisms, we have trusted voices. And when the authority figures and the trusted voices in those communities express their support for the census, as well as the importance and easiness with which to respond, I think we will achieve a lot of progress in that area.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr.
Thank
Chairman.
Senator Simon. Senator Rosen.
Appreciate you bringing this hearing. Thank you for all the witnesses for being here today. I want to continue on a little bit on the language assistance mode before I go into some other areas. So, Dr. Dillingham, last week, I joined some of my colleagues in sending a letter requesting that the Census Bureau provide additional language options for the Internet self-response and census questionnaire, including Khmer, Hmong, and Lao. These support services would ensure that immigrant communities from places like Cambodia, Vietnam, and Laos, including the large Laotian community in southern Nevada, can actively participate in the census and be counted. So as we noted in these letters, sometimes these communities face unique challenges because of their refugee experiences, intergenerational poverty, and trauma faced during the Vietnam War. So I'm wondering if you've had a chance to review the letter and if there's currently a plan to offer assistance and self-response in these languages.
Senator, I will look, I am aware of a series of letters that touch on this topic. I will certainly get back to you very soon with regard to your letter. We have 59 languages that we provide assistance to. We do, through our customer service phone centers, we have English plus 12 additional languages, which would not encompass the ones that you mentioned. And then we actually have a list where we go down through the 59 languages, and the percentage population that we're able to reach with the language assistance is 99.6%. And that's still not enough. We have the enumerators that ultimately will be knocking on the doors, but we would appreciate self-reporting ahead of time. So in those areas and in the languages you mentioned, I'm assuming maybe it's in an urban area, maybe it's in Las Vegas or whatever. We have partnership specialists there that will identify that need, and they will link up with the local university or whoever can assist in that effort. In terms of actually changing our, it's probably unlikely at this point that we can actually change our systematic way of reaching them, but we will find a way to reach
We can find a
this
way to
population.
get them there.
Yes.
Thank you. I want to move on to a little bit of the IT and cyber staffing. So today, the GAO released a report detailing the actions the Census Bureau has to take to address the key risks for a successful census. Under the category of cybersecurity, it's noted as of the end of May of 2019, the Bureau had over 330 corrective actions from its security assessments that need to be addressed. Out of the 330, 217 were considered high risk or very high risk. Of those 217, 104 recommendations were delayed, considered delayed due to technical challenges or resource constraints. So I want to ask a little bit about resource constraints. Are they a financial issue or a manpower issue? Number one, which one? Then I have some other follow-up questions.
Senator, with regard to those specific 330, I mentioned in my opening statement later that risk management is the way we do business, and we have a continuing list of those risks. And right now, it's in the age.
No, but in order to address these,
Yes, sir.
do you need financial help or do you need
but-
manpower help?
Yeah.
And with the manpower, I have one
Sure.
important
Okay.
question.
I would say actually neither of the two are the driving force, because we continuously, and we will have 300 or perhaps more risk. They change every day. Risks come off and risks go on.
So how can they
it's
not?
a very dynamic.
A person has to correct them. So there has to be some man hours
That
associated
is correct, but we'll
with-
never, we've had the discussions internally, we will never be at zero. If
No,
zero,
I understand you're
yes.
never at zero. But in order to meet your timeline, these very high-risk things, we have a timeline of when we have to start and when we have to end. So understanding we'll never be at zero, always
Sure.
taking corrective action. I wrote computer software for a living. I get it.
Sure.
But my point is that these tasks that need to be done, as far as manpower is concerned, are they consecutive tasks or concurrent tasks? Is throwing more people at it the issue? Is it a matter of trying to test it concurrently? How can we help you be sure that you meet and correct these highest issues with the resources that you need? There's a very specific begin and end date here. It's not an ongoing rolling thing that we always have when we're maintaining software systems, every software system in the world.
Yes. Well, Senator, we have remedied or resolved 150,000 risks. So the 300, which of all varieties, we continuously work on.
So then you feel confident you need no more resources to address the risk?
Senator, we have actually, we have a good team in place. We always could use a few more, but I can't say that the process and having those risks are necessarily the product of that. We have talents, and we do have some openings in some of our IT areas that would always be, and we're working to fill those now, but I can't say it's the direct product of a current budget need. So it's not because of a lack of funding, it's attracting the talent and getting the right people in the right place doing the right things, and we are working them. So we can always do better, we can always work harder, but we're working the rest.
And do you think, and I actually really want to, and I don't, what I'm thinking is as we go forward, and we have a timeline for this, and there's always things to do, and so as we tie this into our cyber-ready workforce bills, other things that I've introduced, we have these ongoing needs. This is one of the reasons that I'm asking, because as we prepare not just for a census that happens every 10 years, but for things that happen every year, the resources, the manpower, having that in place, understanding those needs and how we can help position people to be in that place is really important. And so that's why I was asking this question.
I agree with you, Senator, and the GL will testify that we're making progress. We want to make more progress and do it faster. But I can tell you that if there was a direct resource need, I would certainly identify it to you. But I can't attribute that at this time that it's a resource need that's causing this risk list. It's really what we call a risk appetite is the language used by GAO. You have to assess their risk each and every day as an individual or as an organization or as a program. For example, if I get on a motorcycle, I have to decide that I want my apparel and my helmet on. For me, that's I've got to require that. Others may not. But it's your risk appetite, and we do want to make sure we lower those risks. We're working to lower those risks. And if we identify that this is a result of a lack of resources, we will certainly work with the committee and bring it to your attention.
Please let us know, because this is very important that we get it right.
Yes,
Thank you.
Thanks, Senator Rosen. Before I turn it over for a final question, Senator Peters, I want to acknowledge a group of young men that just joined in the hearing room. These are 33 candidates to become Green Beret. They're looking as clean as they're going to look in the next 30 days, because tomorrow they start a 30-day intense field exercise, after which they'll be awarded the Green Beret. So I apologize I wasn't able to meet with you earlier. I'll hopefully stick around from after the hearing to answer a couple questions. But I mean, these gentlemen are the best of the finest among us, and I can't thank you enough for your service, and we'll talk to you after the hearing. Senator Peters.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman, and also I want to wish my best as well to these future Green Berets. We wish you all the best. The Green Berets have an incredible history of service to our country, and we are confident that you will continue to carry on that tradition in the years ahead in your service. But Godspeed to each and every one of you. Dr. Dillingham, a final question for you is that many folks, including I think some census experts, but other folks, are very concerned that there are some bad actors out there that are going to attempt to discourage people from participating in the census, and you're likely to see some disinformation campaigns put out through social media and other outlets. We obviously see misinformation or disinformation campaigns in a variety of contexts now around the world. Mm-hmm. It's reasonable to expect we're likely to see it in this realm, particularly given the fact that trust is such an important aspect of census collection. So my question to you is, what are you doing to combat intentional disinformation campaigns that will be used to mislead the public? And specifically, are you working with platforms like Facebook and Twitter in anticipation of this? What can we expect out of the Bureau, the Census Bureau?
Senator, it's an excellent topic in question. We are working with the groups that you mentioned and some other groups. We're working with the private sector as well. We do have collaborative relationships in place where they will share information with us as we need it, but we're also working, as I mentioned, with the intelligence agencies, and particularly DHS. So we're thinking about it. We have a group devoted to just this topic, and they're doing both planning for prevention as well as response to these types of activities. And I do think, regretfully, we're in that age now where this is, as you accurately point out, this is a potential vulnerability and a threat. And so we're planning for it. We're thinking of ways to help prevent it. And we are working with, I think, the best people with the most knowledge in both the public and private sector on that. But even in those sectors, it's something that they constantly work on and are worried about. And we are making plans in coordination with them to respond to it, to mitigate it should it occur.
Well, I appreciate that. I think I'd like to have a further discussion with you.
Be glad to with staff and get into more specifics.
To look in the details.
Yes.
This is an issue we're confronting in the Homeland Security Committee very broadly. Both Chairman and I serve on Armed Services Committee. These are real issues that we have to address. So I look forward to working with your staff and getting a better sense of how you plan to handle it. And then as these things materialize, the types of reactions that you're engaged in would be very helpful for us to monitor in our oversight capacity. With that, thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thanks, Senator Peters. Again, I want to thank our witnesses, Director Dillingham, Mr. Goldenkoff, and Mr. Marino. So thank you for your testimony, taking the time. Thank you for your professionalism. I really do leave this hearing feeling a lot better about the census. Again, not that there may not be some risk, but I think they're being pretty well managed and thought about, and that's the first step in managing risk, is understanding it and trying to mitigate it. So with that, the hearing record will remain open for 15 days until July 31st at 5 p.m. for the submission of statements and questions for the record. This hearing is adjourned.
Thank you.